On today's episode of Work Trends, we're talking building your EQ with Valerie Sargent. Welcome to the Work Trends podcast from Talent Culture. I'm your host, Megan M. Bureau. Every week, I interview interesting people and brands who are reimagining work. For more information, be sure to check us out at talentculture.com and join us live on Twitter every Wednesday at 1:30 p.m. Eastern using the hashtag WorkTrends. Today's guest is Valerie Sargent. Valerie is a certified emotional intelligence trainer. Her background is in real estate, and she realized way back in 2005 that emotional intelligence wasn't being taught in her industry or really anywhere else. I'm really excited to talk to her today about what EQ really means, why it matters, and how we can all become more emotionally intelligent at work and heck, at life, right? So Valerie, let's dive right in. What is EQ and how did you get interested in helping people with this?
Oh, thank you, Megan. First of all, it's so great to be here with you today. Thank you for that. Your EQ is actually another acronym for emotional intelligence. You'll sometimes hear emotional intelligence abbreviated as EI or EQ, and EQ stands for your emotional quotient as opposed to your intelligence quotient. So emotional intelligence is basically just using your emotions intelligently to gain the performance that you really want to see within yourself, and then also to be effective interpersonally with others in the workplace, in your life, as you said. This is something that, we can all grow in personally as well as professionally. And you asked how I got interested in emotional intelligence, and it was back in 2005. I was at a conference where I heard Daniel Goleman speak. It was actually what used to be the American Society of Training and Development at that time. It's now ATD. He's actually the one who brought emotional intelligence to the workplace as a topic, for us to deal with professionally. He was somebody who, has written for the New York Times. He reported on the brain and behavioral sciences, and everything that he was talking about fascinated me. I couldn't believe everything that I was hearing because I'd never heard things being discussed regarding emotional topics with reference to the workplace in this manner. And it's kind of like puzzle pieces were falling into place for me. And it's one of those things, though, that you go to a conference and you take a lot of notes and then you just kind of move along with your life and career. Unfortunately, many people go to conferences and then put everything they learned on the shelf. But little pieces of that stuck with me. And I really started paying attention to any situations where I'd see emotions shown by people out in the field. So my real estate background is actually within the multifamily industry. So property management of apartment communities, and people who are out in the field encounter so many personalities and emotional situations with residents who live at their apartment communities, not to mention, dealing with all of the employees that they have as well. And it was about 5 years after that I came across the book Emotional Intelligence 2.0. And that was a time in my speaking and training career where I was really focused on teaching leasing, customer service, sales, and leadership. And I realized that this was a topic that wasn't being taught to my industry. And I realized that the authors had a certification program, and I looked into it. I knew that I needed to have the tools available to me. They had an excellent curriculum that I could bring to companies, and then an appraisal system that I could take not only to the multifamily industry, but also be able to expand into basically any industry, because every company benefits from emotional intelligence.
You know it. And I have to say, I'm a huge Daniel Goleman fan as well, and have written about him extensively. I think the world, if you have not gotten out there and read him, please do. Amazing stuff, right?
So good.
Yeah, so good. I love your background. It's so interesting. Tell us, why is it important to talk about EQ and help teams build their EQ when we talk about culture?
Well, people aren't always conscious of what they're bringing to work with them. Everybody carries a lot of emotional baggage and history with them, and that causes them to sometimes react inappropriately to their coworkers. What they may do habitually in a family situation, when they bring that to work and act out in the same manner, it can create huge HR issues. And everybody brings a history of how they were raised to deal with conflict or with difficult situations. We find that people have been taught either appropriately or inappropriately by their bosses or their mentors how to handle things during stressful times at work. But we learn most from the environments that we've been exposed to or through education when we're really trying to improve ourselves. But when I was growing up in school, EQ wasn't even on the radar. Some schools are starting to incorporate it now, and I hope that that is a trend that we will continue to help students build a foundation on. I actually had a moment where I was consulting and I was actually out on site at an apartment community, and there was a young lady there who was an amazing leasing consultant. She was so good at her job. But when she was having something going on personally, everybody could feel it. She would come into the office and it's like the office instantly sensed that something was wrong, and she was definitely displaying her emotions out there. And I pulled her aside and I pulled her into the manager's office and I said, if you're having such a tough day and a challenge with this situation, maybe you need to talk to your manager about taking a personal day, because it's really important that you learn to leave emotions outside the door when you come to work. And she started crying. And she said, no one ever taught me how. No one taught me how to leave emotions at the door. Like, I don't even know what to do.
It's amazing to me how many people feel like they have to be a certain way in a certain environment. And now more and more people are bringing their whole selves to work and sharing about it, right? So finding that balance and being human, and being respectful and creating culture, it's not as easy as it looks.
It's really not. And, it was a big eye opener for me, because I had never really thought about it in that way, that we're not taught. You learn as you grow. In your own career, you've learned along the way, and you've learned kind of what to do, what not to do, but no one really teaches you how to manage your emotions on the job.
I so agree. And I bet the audience, if you're here and you're listening, share your thoughts with us using work trends as the hashtag. We really want to hear from you as well, because everybody has their own story to tell. I know that it's not just about helping your employees manage their emotion. This all starts at the top. Let's be honest, right? So tell me, how can leaders manage their emotions? What in your experience has given you the tools to know how to manage this and tell others, and teach others how to do this?
Well, it definitely starts at the top. You're right, Megan. There's an emotional culture to every company. And unfortunately, a lot of leaders don't know what kind of emotional culture they're creating, because they may not be aware of their own emotional intelligence. So let's take, for an example, you have a leader who's maybe a bit of a hothead, who raises his or her voice when things aren't going as planned. They yell at their employees, make them feel unsafe, essentially. And how does that trickle down to the rest of the company? You're building a culture of fear in that situation, which is very toxic, and it causes employee morale to drop. People leave, the performance suffers in the organization. But, on the other side of that, if you have a leader who's a really good communicator, who cares about his or her employees, and this is somebody who ensures that each employee knows what their role is, what their responsibilities are, what the expectations are, they feel valued and they buy into a shared purpose at the company. So it becomes a healthy situation and creates loyalty and retention. But, it's hard for leaders to manage their emotions when they don't even know what's going on in their brains and in their bodies, what their face is saying, how their body language is,
So
what's
many
actually
pieces.
coming out of their mouth.
Right.
Yeah, so
Right.
they don't know. So really, it's training that can make a difference. A lot of leaders can learn how to manage their emotions when they learn to recognize them. So a lot of times, especially for high-level leaders, maybe some targeted work on EQ skills through coaching or through reading and learning, it can help them learn to recognize what's happening with their bodies when those emotions bubble to the surface, and when they're creating bad results in the workplace. There's definitely power in going through an appraisal process that tells you where you're strong and where you're weak, where you need to grow.
Did I just hear appraisal process? So this is really a program, right? Part of me wants to say to you, this all sounds fabulous. The other part of me, the pragmatic listener who's been, having these stories unfold over the years of bad leadership, to be honest, like how many leaders don't even want to sign up for this though? Like when you look at like the disconnect that we still have with bad leadership, you wonder, how many are willing to make these changes and to go into a program and really admit that they don't have all the answers. I bet you see that a lot.
I think that, emotional intelligence, when you want to enhance it, it has to start with your ability to, want to improve yourself, to be able to look at yourself, to be introspective, to realize that none of us are perfect. We all have room for growth. And, it usually is a leader that realizes that they're deficient in some ways, that they want to, actually help themselves grow, but also to help their teams grow. And a lot of times, if you have a leader who doesn't have high EQ, then sometimes they're not going to be somebody that's going to buy into a program like this.
And not every leader does, right? Not every leader has high EQ. So when you coach leaders, you talk about the pause. It's in the pause. What do you mean by this?
So, well, one night I was having a conversation with my friend Esther, and it was early in the EQ portion of my career, and we were talking about how people can increase their emotional intelligence. And I said to her, well, basically, it's in the pause. And I stopped. I paused, if you would. But I reflected on it, and I said it again and really thought about it. It's in the pause, and that's the space where emotional intelligence happens. Because when we are able to pause, we're able to take in a situation for what it actually is, or we're able to look at other angles. The problem is with emotional reactions is that it's going through the emotional center of our brain before it gets to the logic area. And a pause can actually help us process information in order to handle it more logically, but we have to know what's going on with our bodies and with, things that are happening with our emotions, internally before we can sometimes get to that logical space. So a pause can help in many regards with that.
And who has the time? That could be one response you're receiving. That's me in real time going to you to actually pause in these transformative times when we're all running in 20,000 different directions. That's a tall order, but I'm willing to kind of take you up on it today. I have a blizzard happening outside right now, right? We have, my day didn't go exactly the way I thought it might today. I think everybody has those triggers. So it's really interesting to me to hear you just say, sometimes just stop, look within and see what's making you get upset. Speaking of this, how do you coach people to pause? What are some exercises we can all do to pause and check in with ourselves?
Well, a pause can be for a moment of reflection to, again, make sure we understand a situation more clearly. For me, taking a pause to breathe, because many people breathe very shallowly in times of stress, or we hold our breath. I'm a breath holder in a stressful situation. And, if you're not breathing, you're dying. So you pretty much want to figure out how to get your body going again. So
love it.
It also, if you take a really deep breath, it can set off your parasympathetic nervous system that really starts to calm our bodies down. And, so that's a physical thing that we can do, but we can pause for clarity. So really looking at another person and where they're coming from in a situation, trying to understand their point of view. A lot of times we get caught up in our own thoughts and we're not looking at things fully. So pausing to frame a situation differently. So if you look at things from another angle, if you're finding yourself reacting to something, change the parts. You can change the parts of a situation. Like if your best friend were going through this situation, what would you advise them to do? Would you be feeling the same way if somebody else were in the situation? Or maybe if it were at a different time, if you reframe it and you think, gosh, if it wasn't the day after I had this huge fight with my husband, would I still be reacting this way? Or, it wasn't the same day as this other thing happened. Would I feel differently? And a lot of times that answer is yes. So, pausing to deal with stress, quieting your mind. Maybe you take a walk before a difficult conversation, or you schedule it for the next day after you've actually had some sleep. Sleep
Oh, there
deprivation
you
is one of the
go.
biggest issues in
Yes.
creating emotional disturbance.
Oh,
So,
absolutely. I'm so glad you brought up sleep. So important. And I think so
absolutely.
often we don't have that luxury of being able to sleep more. And you're making, you have to realize you're making those mistakes, right? To look within. Let me ask you this. Because a lot of this has to do with people's personalities and how they react to coaching or stress, etc. Do you ever change your structure or your program according to personality? Or do you
Well,
have a pretty standard protocol?
Well, it depends. So on the training programs, it is a standard protocol. It is a curriculum that's been developed with a lot of time and attention and research. So it's activity based, and the curriculum is what it is. The discussions that happen at tables during a training are different depending on who the participants are.
Yeah.
So but with coaching, with like my EQ executive coaching, that's very targeted and individual, and it's based on what is working well with a particular client. There's a foundation that typically stays the same. Like I will a lot of times have my coaching clients keep a journal because, when they do get upset about things or when things happen, if they are tracking that information, they can start to recognize patterns. And we all have patterns. We have, our brains, we have the neuroplasticity in our brains. Our brains are used to going down certain pathways of reaction. And when we learn to identify what those pathways are, we can choose a different path. And that's very, very powerful. I've had some really meaningful moments just even, talking to people after a keynote where they didn't realize. I had a gentleman come up to me. He said, "Thank you so much. I didn't know that I was reacting so negatively toward my boss because he reminded me of my abusive stepfather."
Mm,
And,
that's
I mean, there
real.
are little moments. There are
Yeah,
moments
there
that people
is.
realize, and everybody's different.
And everybody needs a mirror. Everybody
Hmm.
needs that point of reference where they say, "What's up here? Let me look within."
Well,
You
you raise a good point, Megan, actually, with that mirror idea, because it's a lot about what's happening with our bodies and our faces. I've done some trial preparation for witnesses to work with them
yeah.
on handling their emotions, and they don't know what their face looks like in
No,
certain situations. So look in the mirror, people. Know
absolutely.
what-
Hashtag mirror, everybody. So listen, more and more of us are working on remote and distributed teams where we might not even see our coworkers, right? How do you coach remote teams and managers? Is it different from other types of teams?
Oh, it's definitely different because the communication challenge can really be there. And you're relying on emails and texts more often to get through to people. And people are left to their own devices of interpreting those emotions that are happening actually behind things. So, the subtext to the texting at times. And when someone is, for instance, maybe being direct and to the point, they don't think anything of it. They send off a little text or an email that could come off as really gruff to someone who is in a remote location. So there's a lot to be said for being able to look someone in the eye, to know that they're joking. You can't always
Yeah.
rely on emoticons, but I recommend really, we have so much great technology available to us today, like FaceTime or
Yep.
Skype or Zoom, where we can have face-to-face meetings with our remote teams to make sure that they feel that the culture is inclusive. So schedule those regular calls, try to get them on video when possible. If someone's not integrated into the rest of the team, they may feel excluded and they may just start making up their own rules, which is not great.
Which happens quite often, actually. And I think it's important to remember emoticons don't really spell out what somebody's saying to all of you out there on Facebook right now, right? So I think incorporating it and having that FaceTime, I talk about that a lot. I think it's so important. Speaking of like all these cool tools, I mean, do you have any favorites for managing yourself, your emotions, staying calm? What's out there right now for us to learn about?
I do actually. There are some really cool apps out there. One that I like when I'm in the workplace, just to kind of keep my focus going, if there's a lot of stuff going on around me, is Calm. It's an app that you can actually have kind of some nature sounds in the background. Meditation has been proven to be really, really good for emotional intelligence. So I like an app called Living in Love. Deepak Chopra developed that app, and he kind of talks you in and talks you out of a meditation. Holosync, I actually use Living in Love for more like napitation. I'll take like a quick 20-minute nap with that.
But I love that word, by the way. Just that word alone.
It's the only way that I'm really, really successful at meditating, it seems like. But Holosync is one that actually takes you through. There's a purchase with this one. It takes you through. You listen with headphones on, and you can choose, do you want to focus on success or health or change or creativity, self-confidence, whatever it might be. And it's a 30-minute meditation that is using technology to take your brain through the meditative states. For the people that normally practice napitation like me, it can actually get you where you're supposed to go. So that's
the secret is bringing your brain there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And we, there are a lot of people out there that have a negative self-talk. There's another app called Mind PT that has positive messaging and images, so they could, watch that every day to get some daily positivity. Dr. Daniel Amen has Brain Fit Life that allows you to kind of go through a test for your brain to figure out what type of brain you have, and maybe recommend some supplements that you can be missing, because nutrition is hugely important for the brain and then for your emotional intelligence.
Well, and we thought you would have this brief list, but here we have, everybody. We got options. So go on ahead and utilize these. I know I might. So listen, EQ is really a hot topic right now. Why do you think more people are interested right now in improving this? To me, it feels like all of a sudden it's the year of EQ. Why is that?
Well, I think people are finally starting to hear about emotional intelligence more these days. So it's not quite as unknown as it was previously. It's been fun for me to be in the airports during my travels and see books actually on EQ that are featured in the bookstores. But I'm still always surprised when I go to speaking engagements. I usually ask, how many people know what emotional intelligence is? And still less than half the hands in an audience go up. So I think, we are making headway. I think that, a lot of people are looking for more emotionally intelligent leadership. It has been out in the workplace since 1995, but I think finally, our workplaces are starting to embrace the need for it, and they see that it is the difference in the success people are having at work. It's not all about the IQ. Your EQ weighs in very heavily with your level of success.
Speaking of your level of success, I think I want to learn from you, and I think the audience probably does as well. Talk about a day in the life and being you. How do you personally manage your emotions?
I think it goes back to what we talked about earlier. I try to get enough sleep, although after this time change, I'm a little sleep challenged. But, I was talking with the director of wellness at the Center for New Medicine recently, and she said that, the sleep deprivation is one of the biggest challenges that we have. And, when you look at disease, it's dis-ease in the body. If we're not treating our bodies well and our brains well, we're going to have a hard time healing anything, whether it's from stress or, something more serious. So I try to eat healthy foods. I eat a protein, a healthy carb, and an essential fatty acid during meals, so that my brain is more balanced with proper nutrition. I'm certainly not perfect.
You sound like you got it all going on over there. So tell us some examples. Like, what is your favorite meal these days? Could be lunch, could be dinner.
I love, so my favorite breakfast, I just had it for breakfast today. So here's a great example. I saute some spinach and scramble eggs, and I top it with avocado. So you've got the veggies, you've got the protein of the eggs, and then the avocado is the healthy fat. So that's like a go-to breakfast day. And start with breakfast. A lot of people skip breakfast, but it's really, truly our most important meal of the day. But I also pay attention to like when my body is having stress, like when my shoulders feel tight or when my neck muscles tighten there in the back. if my throat feels constricted, I pay more attention to my breath because I told you I'm a breath holder. So I try to really take deep breaths when I'm feeling stressed. And I also practice a little bit of self-care. I'll go get a pedicure. I'll get a massage.
Nice.
I have a hot bath. Listen to some music. Music is a huge changer for mood. I'm nice to myself. I treat myself with kindness.
I love that. Well, listen,
I call my mom every day.
Mom, that so helps, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And laughing. Laughing helps a lot.
Well, listen, we have really appreciated having you here. Join us, everyone, on Twitter, which is going to happen this Wednesday at 1:30 p.m. Eastern. We're going to continue to unfold this conversation utilizing the hashtag #WorkTrends. And thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to Work Trends from Talent Culture. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And I'd be really grateful if you took a moment to leave a rating and review on iTunes. It helps other people find our show. If you know someone who would enjoy listening, please share it with them. You can learn more about the future of work at talentculture.com.